President Donald Trump declares a ceasefire between Israel and Iran is in effect and has urged both sides not to violate it.
Trump is hopeful the truce will lead to an end to the near two-week conflict. And the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, joins us now from Westminster.
Good morning.
Good morning, Priti Patel. I put to Pat McFadden this morning the question as to whether or not Donald Trump's actions at the weekend had led to this ceasefire, but also opened up the possibility for a new set of negotiations. And I read to him the Times editorial today. Sir Keir Starmer's lukewarm support for Donald Trump's campaign against Iran's nuclear weapons programme has resulted in Britain being marginalised and ignored. Is the Times right?
Well, I actually think there's a degree of truth in that, and I think Britain was blindsided at the weekend when it came to those strikes. You may be aware that I asked the questions very directly, even yesterday in Parliament, to the Foreign Secretary David Lammy as to whether or not the government even had a view, let alone supported those strikes at the weekend. So I simply think that right now, you know, we're at a stage where those strikes were all about degrading Iran's nuclear capability. We should be welcoming that as a country because Iran is a threat to us. They sponsor terrorist proxies in the Middle East. They are a nation that basically wants to see the only Jewish state in the world eliminated. This is simply not acceptable. And I think really, yet again, you know, the government has not been leveraging its real support for our biggest ally in the world, America, which keeps us safe. But we're just not leveraging our place in the world, I think, in the way in which that British diplomacy and the British diplomatic service has done in the past.
Of course, you are a well-known supporter of Israel, rightly so. In fact, you lost your job back in 2017 for a trip to Israel, an unauthorised trip at the time when you were Development Secretary. When you look back over the last year and a half since the terrible October massacre by Hamas against Israeli citizens, the taking of hostages, are there any actions that you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel has taken in Gaza or with Iran, which you worry about, which you would tell us you have concerns about? I ask that because we've just got breaking news this morning. At least 25 people have been killed in Gaza after Israeli forces opened fire towards people waiting for an aid truck, according to witnesses and hospitals in Gaza. Are there any actions where you would be willing to take a cautionary note to Netanyahu?
Well, I've always said the situation in Gaza is simply unacceptable, and the Israeli government has to do so much more when it comes to securing aid going into Gaza. There have been fundamental problems there now for months, Ed. This is not new. This is simply not right, and it's not good enough. I would just say one thing about this, though. Over a year ago, in fact, I think it was when David Cameron was Foreign Secretary, there were fundamental issues with getting aid into Gaza with the Israeli government, and it was David Cameron and the last government that negotiated aid access, opened up land routes, got a new bridge in from Cyprus to help get aid in. I just don't think our government is doing enough in this whole area. We want to see a sustainable peace in Gaza. That is absolutely vital. And that means all parties have to come to the table. We need to see an end to Hamas. They're a terrorist organisation. They're responsible for October the 7th. But we do need to see our government working with the Israeli government. And I think you're very well aware of this. We seem to be, this country and our government, they spend more time being critical of Israel rather than working with them to find solutions to the horrendous situation and the awful humanitarian disaster that we have been seeing in Gaza. And
just a quick question on the security threat here in the UK. We had reports over the weekends of Iranian sleeper cells. You, as a Privy Councillor, I'm sure will have had briefings as Shadow Foreign Secretary on the security threat. I asked because the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, yesterday rather oddly said the UK has been cut out of US intelligence briefings because it can't be trusted, before adding that she didn't have any proof for those claims. Do you think the UK has been cut out of intelligence briefings, or have you had intelligence briefings from the Foreign Office on the threats here in the UK?
Yes, of course I've been involved in briefings. That's absolutely right and proper. And I've asked for those briefings. And what I'm not going to get into, and I think you will understand this, is how intelligence flows between our two countries. I have been in government. I've been to the intelligence services in America as well. There are ways in which we have particular ways of working. There are sometimes time lags around all of that. I'm not going to get into the details of that because obviously that's highly sensitive information. At the end of the day, I have briefings, my colleagues have briefings. I was a former Home Secretary for over 3 years. I'm too well aware, I'm afraid to say, of the threat that Iran poses to our country in terms of state threats. You will be aware of I think it was 7 or 8 arrests that took place about 8 weeks ago of Iranian dissidents in our country. We know of an Iranian spy at our base in Cyprus just at the weekend. This is disturbing and it's deeply concerning, and every government of the day must do everything to protect our country from dissidents, from spies, from adversaries, from hurting our country. And that's basically why we work so hard with our intelligence and security services, who are phenomenal in their ways of working, why they work hard to keep us safe.
Shadow Foreign Secretary, you've already mentioned how important national security is and how the British government should be levering its position on the international stage to greater effect. The Prime Minister announced that the UK expects to spend 5% of GDP on national security by the Parliament after next. That must come as enormously welcome news to you as the Shadow Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'd like to say yes, but you've just used one word, he expects. So this is an unfunded spending announcement that he's making.
But you would back that 5% commitment?
Well, look, we're not in government to even say that we would back it. The reality is there's no money. There's no money, Susanna, coming for this. In the same way, I'm sure you reported last month, the Strategic Defence Review, which fell apart because there was no money behind it at all.
Okay,
we've got procurement
governments can always find
right
money, as we know. You must back 5% of GDP in a world which feels less safe, and the UK government should be protecting its citizens.
I back at least 3% funding coming to this country and defence spending by 2029, which is the end of this Parliament, and the government aren't even going to commit to that. 10 years is hypothetical. Talking about 5% over 10 years, Keir Starmer won't even be Prime Minister by then. This is simply not acceptable to go to NATO and make unfunded spending commitments in this way. It would have been great for him to say, yes, we'll do this, and this is the plan for it, and they've not done that. So I think actually there should be honesty and some transparency around this, particularly as we've been discussing in this very difficult time where geopolitics is very unstable. We had an interview with President Zelensky. He was in London just yesterday, where even he was saying 10 years is far too long. We need the money and the investment now.
OK, the previous Conservative government committed to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. This is double that commitment. I mean, you say you don't know where the money's coming from, but do you back the principle?
Well, look, first of all, on 2.5%, it was the Conservative Party in opposition that paved the way for this government to put the money into 2.5 from the overseas development budget. That's the right thing to do. I'm telling you what we would do. We would do 3% by 2029. That's 4 years, by the way, not over 10 years, which is what Keir Starmer is proposing. And he is speaking about a hypothetical, unfunded
But I'm just trying to get for our viewers whether you even back the idea of 5%.
Look, we would back, Susanna, you've got to understand, this is the NATO thresholds.
Yes.
When it comes to defending NATO thresholds, we're very clear about that. Good. We're not in government. We don't have access to funding or even how to do the costed plans right now because we don't know what future finances would look like. When it comes to the NATO thresholds, we've always been crystal clear that we would be working hard to strive to meet those. I've been clear about that. My party has been. But what we're seeing right now from this government is something that is completely unfunded. And I just don't think that's credible when we know what the threats are, when we see how precarious and dangerous the world is, and when that commitment is 10 years away.
You've been clear that the last Conservative government increased immigration too much after Brexit. Are you also clear that the last Conservative government cut defence spending too much in the Cameron-Osborne years?
Well, look, those were as you'll remember those years from your own time in government, they came after a massive financial crisis, a global financial crisis. And you'll also recall that the credit rating of this country was in jeopardy because of the precarious situation of the public finances. And that was a period of quantitative easing and all sorts of measures that were brought in place. The reality is we had to...
spending was cut in real terms by 22%.
It's a different proposition to where we are now. The government of the day had to cut its cloth accordingly, which is clearly not about making unfunded spending commitments and taxing and borrowing at unsustainable levels. It's a different situation back then in 2010 to where we are today, and I think we should just be honest about that.
Dame Priti Patel, thank you very much indeed.